Hey everyone, Dave Putz here from JKP Holdings. Alongside me, as always, Mr. Nathan Turner.
Good day.
Good day, good day. Hopefully we have a little better audio situation here today. If we don't, I'll go ahead and make sure we fix it pretty quickly, as I think I figured out the issue over here, but we'll go from there. So,
Yeah.
Nathan,
Yes.
we're gonna get it out of the way first. Mention it, I guess, in the room or whatever. Canada is going through craziness right now from the state side. Without getting too detailed, how are you? Is everything going okay?
We're totally fine. Everything was just so I'm in just outside of Montreal. I don't know if anything was happening in Montreal at all. I hardly ever go into Montreal. It's, I've got my home office, so that's good enough for me. As far as I know, really everything was going on in Ottawa, right at Capitol Hill. And so I mean, it's fine. Everything's cleared now. My friends in Alberta were upset because the border was blocked, and that was inconvenient, but really that's really all it was. So we're fine. Everything's good. We're good.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, right? Because there was a few people mentioning how they were very curious how you're making out. And of course, what we hear is a lot different from what is possibly happening.
Yeah, I just keep my head down, keep doing what I'm doing, whatever. I went snowboarding this morning. It was fantastic.
So
good.
Business as usual, right?
For me, yeah. I know there were certain people that were, it was really disruptive and like I say, inconvenient more than anything else. But by and large, really business as usual.
I'm glad to hear that, man.
Yeah, thanks.
Because
you guys, and I've heard of outside of Canada, there New Zealand in particular, but we don't have anyone on the call from New Zealand. But anything else going on anywhere?
I haven't heard anything, right? I know at the end of the day, we don't know what's happening anywhere else. As long as we're doing okay, we got to focus on what we can do, right? We can only do what we can do. And I think for me, we're curious. It comes back to curiosity, right?
Yeah, I don't really pay very much attention. In everything that I do, my main focus is how is this going to affect my business? That's really what it comes down to for me. I don't get too upset otherwise.
Yeah, it's, how does it affect me? How does it affect my family? If all that's good, it's all that matters.
Yeah.
Right? So,
yeah.
Well, glad you joined us, man. I know that we're selling a few assets right now. We bought a few assets last week. We're seeing some influx of deals coming through. Mm-hmm. Things like that. Things are opening up a little bit, right? There's some talks about the PA contract or deed issue that's possibly going down with.
That's an interesting situation. Right? Yeah. I had that call from the AG years ago, this 5 or 6 years ago. And that was a scary call. But in the end, luckily I'd already foreclosed through all the proper channels. Everything else was all good. And I had already actually sold the property. Yeah. So it didn't actually come back to me at all, but it's out there.
Yeah.
If you don't know what we're talking about, look on Facebook.
The whole feed. I did not expect what came out of me posting that. So I'm glad it helped who would do. So Smitty still load everyone. So I'm glad. Feel free to post comments and questions below. I think today's video is going to be really, really needed heard. What you're going to get from this thing, right? And this recording will be on YouTube and Facebook, all the good stuff. And check out Nathan's Facebook group. He's running some stuff. And his YouTube channel too, so make sure you promote it. We'll have this on there, and the thing is something you're gonna have to listen to a few times. Because this will, if you're learning what you're learning, this can change how you do business and your profits. So this is a key thing. There are some things we got to make sure of. However, just take some information and put it in your back pockets for when you need to use it. It's available. Cool.
Yeah.
So, Nathan, you and I have been through foreclosures before. I think sometimes more than we want to be.
Yes. Many times. And sometimes it's not a big deal. Other times it's a big deal and it's a big ordeal. I've had 2, I know we're talking specifically about New York. I've done 2 New York notes and I've sworn off New York. The foreclosures were such a headache.
We're going to see if you can change your mind.
Yeah, I'm hoping that this would open some doors again.
I think I can.
For me, foreclosure started off as a really crazy system that we didn't understand, came to a point where it was a systematic thing, and we knew when to check in bullet points. We knew when a deal was good, when it passed judgment, a judgment date and all that stuff, and we have all that stuff's good. But the time frame is a big deal, and that's huge, right? The cost we could reduce a little bit, it doesn't change much, but time is money in our business. Taxes, everything to play with it.
Yeah.
So I'm at a conference talking, and I meet a couple of gentlemen who talk about this thing called foreclosure by federal processes, right? And then I jump on a phone call with them that I think was going to be a 10-minute call, that ended up being much longer. And I was astonished to learn that there's been some notes we could have done, save money, time, increase profits, and bid lower simply because of the different processes that we didn't understand. So understanding we need to learn everything to go and play. I haven't yet gone through the foreclosure process. Most of our assets right now either have done or performing. So we're grateful we're stuck in BK. So we're right now grateful for where we're at. And we sold off a couple of them, we're going to get into foreclosure. But Nathan, have you done any foreclosure recently with the whole COVID craziness?
Oh yeah. I've got several in foreclosure at any given time. So it's a pretty common thing for me. For the most part, it's not a big deal. My main, Aaron can tell you, Tuesday is my attorney day. So every Tuesday, if I haven't heard from you, or if you know there's something where I've asked you a question you haven't answered yet, I follow up on Tuesdays. And so that's my attorney follow-up day. And it takes several hours to go through everything and make sure that everything is up to where it needs to be. Did we file that thing that we said we were going to file, or whatever it is, and just kind of keeping up.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think for me, you know, it's a hassle and just a bothersome sometimes. We want to get through it fast. We want to do it right. So we invited Lance on, who's sitting there with a smile on his face, who's been doing this foreclosure process. I think he told us for about 6 months now, right? Lance, you've been doing foreclosures every about 6 months?
It's somewhere between 6 months and 35 years. I lost it. I don't remember.
Lance, can you tell us a little bit about your background, how you got involved? What have you been doing for 35 years of your life?
Well, let me start at the beginning with getting this out of the way, that anything that I'm talking about today is not to be construed by anybody on this call or on this webinar as specific legal advice. The only way we can give you legal advice is if the firm is formally retained, and you're not to take anything that I'm saying as specific advice for any specific set of circumstances. This is all general. And okay, now that the disclaimer, now that the Miranda rights are out there, I've been doing default work now for about 35 years. I ended up stumbling into this purely accidentally. I was doing some regular real estate, residential real estate, and I was a collection attorney. And a friend of mine from law school, who is just retired from the Pennsylvania governor's office as the counsel, was leaving New York and handed me a box full of files and said, "Good luck, I'm out of here." And that was how I got into the REO business. It started off with lease servicing, which was later required by Superior Bank, and a wonderful client then, and still some amazing people I work with. And that was the springboard to get me into this industry. So I've been practicing default work for banks and servicers and note holders now. It's about 35 years. And that's a long, long time, but it's been a journey. It's been
You've seen a lot
of things.
And I started off with a full head of hair, and this is what happened to me. So,
yeah.
So the conversation is about federal court. Let me start off by explaining the biggest differences between federal court and state court, at least in New York. In state court, all judges are elected or appointed by somebody who's elected, which means that there's always a political element to a state court judge in New York. No matter how good or how learned the judge is on the bench as a result of some political process. And you can't remove that element from the process, because a judge's job is not only to sit on the bench and act as a judge, but also in the interest of self-preservation to get reelected or to get moved up to a higher court as time goes by. And we can't get that process, that element out of the way in a state court process. And it's going to vary from, the impact of that will vary from judge to judge. Federal court, conversely, federal court judges are appointed by Congress. It's a lifetime appointment. It is very, very, very difficult to remove a federal court judge. And in my experience, almost without exception, almost every federal court judge is of a much higher caliber than a typical state court judge. And I'm not in any way demeaning the state court judges, but there are different requirements to being a state court judge than there is to being a federal court judge. The federal court judges are typically the cream of the crop. It's a really long and difficult process to get an appointment from Congress to be a federal court judge. And I just saw on the news today that President Biden has his pick for the Supreme Court justice to be, and you'll see the process that goes through. So by the time we get into federal court, we are typically in front of a judge who is removed for the most part from the political process. The judge doesn't have to worry about being going up for election every 2 to 4 years. It's a lifetime appointment, and they can sit back and do their job without interference by anybody else. The federal court docket is also much, much, much smaller than the state court docket. And most importantly, the federal court system is funded better typically than the state court system, which means that there were more clerks, there were more resources, and the not only more in terms of quantity, but also in terms of quality, because the clerks for state court justices have a different role than a clerk for a federal court judge. So we're in front of typically very learned people with good pedigree and without the political element to it. The best part about federal court that we found, as opposed to state court, in state court, anybody who's owned a note and foreclosed on it in New York knows that you have endless litigation, nonsense litigation to stall off the process. And as long as the defendant is capable of making motions, or the attorney has been paid to make motions, the motions will keep coming, orders to show cause after the foreclosure is completed to try to vacate the foreclosure, things that'll tie you up for years. That process doesn't exist in federal court. In federal court, you can't make a motion without the approval from the judge. So there's no such thing as serial, not junk motions to stall down the process. The federal court system is also, the judges in federal court typically have micromanagement control over the timelines. And they watch every day, and we get reminders, and much, much more is expected of the attorneys in New York in federal court than typically in state court. We've found that to be a distinct advantage because the attorneys who customarily represent defendants in foreclosures, more times than not, don't have the skill or the time to defend a case in federal court in the same way they would in state court. In state court, it's often just simply about stalling, to let your client live in the house for as long as possible. That doesn't work in federal court. The judges, as a rule of thumb, don't allow it. And God help anybody who gets in the way of a federal court judge timelines and instructions. So by the time you whittle this down, with a typically a better bench, a better set of judges with better equipped courthouses, better staffing, better timelines, and control over the motion process, you're more likely to have a favorable outcome or a more favorable timeline on an outcome on a foreclosure in New York than if you were in state court. During COVID, we were keeping track of our federal court cases during COVID, and we had about half a dozen that we had completed. In other words, from the filing of the complaint to the judgment, not the sale, because we don't have control over the sale timeline, but from filing the complaint to the judgment, which is really the end of the process, under 6 months. We had some in the 167 day timeline. We had one for 179 days, under 6 months, and we had a whole stack of them well under 1 year. That would
These
be
are all in New York City.
Right?
Come again?
What part of New York was that?
Yeah.
Some of them, there were there are the districts in New York. There's the Southern District, which is mostly New York City. There's the Eastern District, which is Long Island and Brooklyn, and then you have the Northern and Western districts. These were two of them, I believe, were Southern, two were Eastern, and a couple upstate. But even in the upstate courts, which aren't as state courts, which aren't as slow as downstate, to get in and out in under a year is unheard of in state court. That's just not happening.
Usually, what my experience was, it's usually about 280 to 360 minimums, and then you're above that usually.
280 to 360. You post-COVID, it's just the beginning of post-COVID in New York. The moratorium on foreclosures and evictions ended January 15th, so that's about a month ago. So we're still working our way through the new world. But my personal estimate is for downstate New York, where most of the activity is, meaning New York City, Long Island, Westchester, Rockland, whatever the timeframes were pre-COVID, add on between 50% or double the timeframes.
Yeah, both of my foreclosures that I had were upstate New York, and both of them took over 2 years.
Yeah, which is for upstate New York isn't too bad.
To me, that's ridiculous.
I agree with you. It's an abomination that anything should take, nothing should take that long to enforce.
Right.
No, if you don't pay your car loan, we used to do auto repossession work. And if you don't pay your car loan, your car is going to be hauled off in a matter of days on the back of a truck. But there are different rules that apply. You can't repossess a home. You can't jack it up and put it on a trailer and tow it away typically. And there are different rules that apply. But right now, what we're seeing is not only the backlog in the court system from things logjam during COVID and also the new filings that have started, but you add to that process the fact that we can't do auctions in the courtrooms like we used to do, and there has to be safety protocols in place post-COVID, which means, and there are also safety protocols in the courtroom. So in Brooklyn, for example, on a typical day in Kings County in the foreclosure parts, you would see hundreds, if not thousands of people jammed into the building waiting for something to happen. That's not the case anymore. So the existing logjam is logjammed further, and then add on to that all of the files that have been backlogged for 2 years and the lack of activity. It's anybody's guess what's going to happen.
So what you're saying, Lance, is that we typically go through a year plus of upstate New York, and you're telling me you're able to do it in 6 months.
It depends on each case. Stands on its own, but we've had enough cases in the 6 month range that I could tell you that it's possible, because I know it's possible because it's happened. That can it happen again? If it's happened once, it can happen again. It's happened.
And then the question is it more expensive then to do this? I mean, it's a short time frame. It's great. Is it double the price? Because
it's not double the price. The legal fees are more than the Fannie Mae rates. The reason that we're able to do this, our law firm is able to do this, is because we identify, this sounds politically incorrect, and I'm going to apologize to everybody ahead of time. We identify as a boutique law firm, meaning that we're not one size fits all for everybody. We're not a Fannie Mae factory or a Freddie Mac foreclosure mill. We don't have that kind of volume. In federal court, the rules require that the attorney who signs the complaint is the attorney on the case. Wow. And that's it. So we can't send appearance counsel into federal court like we can in state court. So that of course raises the fees. And there are a couple of other fees which are a wee bit higher. So but if you spend another $2,000 or $3,000 in legal fees on a foreclosure, but you're in and out of court in 6 months rather than 6 years, I would say you're ahead of the game.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it also allows you to bid on the notes. You can bid on the note sales much more competitively than the buyers who are expecting to go into state court. They're bidding based upon a 3, 4, 5 year time frame, and you're bidding on based upon a 6 to 12 month time frame.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, you have it. Everyone understand the fact you get your money faster. You're not paying the property tax bill for another 6 months or so, right?
And the forced place insurance.
Yeah.
And code violations.
Serve fees,
right?
All those things add up. That $2,000 is probably a net much higher, right?
So I don't give advice I don't take. So I had a pool of loans that I bought recently. One, we were able to get into federal court. My name wasn't on it, so I didn't have a problem with that. So this gives me the opportunity to tell you about what you need to do to get into federal court. First, the case has to involve money over $75,000. That's easy. That's virtually everything in New York, except for possibly some small second mortgages, will be over 75,000. Number one. Number two, you have to have what's called diversity. Diversity means that the plaintiff is a different citizen than the defendants, and that's where it gets tricky. I have three of our very, very skilled associates on with us in the background, and they can tell you when they get a file and we do a diversity check, which means we have to check the LLC, who owns the LLC. If the LLC is owned by other LLCs, who owns those LLCs? So the ownership, it's almost like a 23andMe or an Ancestry.com family tree. We have to do the entire family tree for the entity that owns the loan. For small private investors, it's very easy. If you are buying a loan and you live in Pennsylvania, you don't vote in New York, you don't have an address in New York, you have no contact with New York, except to come in occasionally and see a Broadway show, and you set up a Pennsylvania LLC, that removes one of the big obstacles in the diversity check. We would just have to make sure that none of the defendants who are named in the foreclosure have a Pennsylvania address.
Gotcha.
And that's our work, the bulk of our work, the real heavy lifting is done the first few minutes we get the file, because we have to check the diversity. So when there's for example, with the banks that own properties by a trust, I'm holding up my hand. We'll see trust agreements that are this thick. They have to be reviewed because we found out the hard way, there's sometimes something buried deep inside the trust agreement that will kill the diversity that we're looking for.
So what you're saying is, just to recap, is that the balance, legal balance loan has to be above 75,000, right?
Correct.
And that no party from the defense side, LLC or person, husband or wife, anyone on the defense side can't have a residency. The property could be in New York, but they have a residency in PA. You cannot file in court with them in federal court because of the fact that if you live in PA or the company's in PA, then you can't. But if you're in Florida, all's good.
That's generally the case. We'd have to examine it on a case-by-case basis because Florida, for example, there are an untold number of people who have Florida residences who still keep their New York residence. So even Florida, even though Florida may be their 186 day a year residence for tax purposes, the other 184 days are in New York, and that may create a problem. So we have to examine each case on a case-by-case basis. It's in state court, all you need to go into state court is a mortgage that was filed against a property located in New York. Bingo. Now you can use the state courts. But federal court is a little bit more restricted because of the rules and the US Constitution and the way federal courts are set up. So but that's generally speaking, what you said, Dave, was correct.
Okay, so I got two questions. So first one is foreigners. Can a Canadian-owned company do this?
The answer is it depends upon the citizenship, and we would have to review that on a case-by-case basis. We don't have too many foreigners, with all due respect to our friends from the Great White North. We don't have too many coming in here to buy loans and foreclose. So, but if you find yourself considering buying a loan and want to do this in federal court, I would suggest contact us first, and we can help you establish the parameters for the purchase. But just let me give you a caveat before I forget.
Sure.
If a case is already pending in state court, you can't stop it and hop over to federal court.
Okay.
But if you're starting a case anew, you can access the federal court if you meet all the timelines and guidelines rather. And I'm sorry, I interrupted you, Matt.
That's okay. So kind of a follow-up question. So, so I just opened this fund, and the fund is a limited partnership. It was created, the limited partnership is Delaware. The limited partners are from all over the place. So if there's a limited partner within that partnership with New York residency, does that exclude us?
Not if it's a New York, if any of the owners of the, again, think of it as a family tree. You're looking for second, third, and fourth cousins.
Yeah.
If any of those second, third, and fourth, fifth, and sixth cousins, twice removed, three times removed, if anybody is considered a New York citizen, then you're going to be you're not going to be able to get into federal court.
Wow.
So we have to do the family tree. We had a very large Wall Street hedge fund find out that the hard way. They set up, there was a one New York citizen 7 generations removed from the LLC that owned the note, and that was enough to get us thrown out.
Wow.
Yeah, so the answer is, these are the things that we have to examine, because we have to make a certification as the attorneys when we file the papers that the case is, that we've met the diversity test.
Okay.
And you don't want to run afoul of that, because if you've blundered that and you come back into court another time with a qualifying LLC, you don't want to have a black eye in federal court. It doesn't do you well.
A lot. With that said, though, what are the typical, processes that are quicker? Is it the fact that the defendant can't get an attorney who knows it? Is it the fact that the judge is very strict on the timelines? Besides not being able to kick the can in the curb, what are some of the things that make it faster?
Well, first, there in New York, for residential mortgages, there's typically a mandatory mediation process, or as I like to call it, let's string this out for another year. And especially with what's going on now in the busy courts, it's going to be the better part of a year just to go through the mediation process. So you're already a year behind. Then you start the actual foreclosure process. There are motions, all sorts of ways to delay, and the judges, frankly, are overwhelmed. The clerks are overwhelmed. You take the mediation process out of the dynamic, and you've already shaved a year. In the current world, you shaved the better part of a year off of the timelines. You also take away the nonsense motions and the post judgment order to show cause, or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, and you've eliminated that. It's also very easy to file an appeal in state court. It's very, very easy. It's not quite as easy to file that same appeal in federal court, or to process the appeal process properly. We've seen in state court where we win the case, we get our judgment, and the borrower walks across the street to state appeals court. There's a pro se part in there. The clerk helps them fill out the form. 1 page, you waive the fee because they're poor, and that's it. Now we're back to the beginning. The case is stopped pending the appeal.
Mm-hmm.
It's more difficult to do that in federal court.
Okay.
But the most significant factor is that in federal court, as opposed to most state court judges, the judges in federal court do control the timelines, and they monitor it brutally carefully. It's with great precision, and it's a different process. And then when we get to the sales, it's also a little bit more dignified too.
So could you? I mean, I know you're in New York. Is this something that could be done in Texas and Florida? Or are the rules different, or?
Well, the answer is, the first question would be, is it worthwhile to do this in another state? If you're in a non-judicial state, there's no sense in going into court in the first place. If you're in a judicial state, then it depends upon the timelines, because some judicial states get you in and out in under a year. So federal court isn't going to make sense. But in the notoriously slow states, for example, New Jersey, New York, I think Massachusetts is also a little bit lumbering. If you can access the federal courts, then that's something to consider. And I would urge you to check with local counsel who handles foreclosures in both state and federal court. In New York, most of the firms that handle foreclosures don't handle federal court, simply because the staffing issue, and they can't use appearance counsel, and also their clients won't qualify for federal court. Either the banks or the Fannie, Freddie, agencies like that aren't going to qualify. So it's of necessity, you need to check with the firm and find out who does the largest volume in that state, the people who are there in that federal court every day, or who are a brand name and a known entity to the judges and the clerks. It makes a difference.
Interesting. So if you've got, you mentioned like the judge keeps a very rigid timeline on that. I'm going to infer that then you can't just go with any attorney, because if they're already overworked and overloaded with whatever else they're doing in the state courts, it'd be very easy to miss one of these deadlines.
it's not only easy to miss it, you have to know who you're in front of. And each judge has his or her own peccadillos, and each judge has his or her own rules. And federal court isn't the place to learn how to practice law, and learn how to practice foreclosure law especially. And if you're a good state court attorney, that's where you belong, in my opinion, because you practice what you do best, practice it where you do best. We don't go into like the patent and trademark court. We're not patent and trademark attorneys. We're not admiralty attorneys. So if your boat gets hit by somebody else's boat, please don't call me. We can't help you, because that's not the area of law that we practice. And the same, it should be no different. You don't call your obstetrician when you break your leg. You call an orthopedist. And they're the same way that doctors limit their practice or specialize in certain areas. So too, we have a team. I've got 3 people on this call who do nothing but federal court.
Yeah.
And it makes a difference in the outcome.
That's fascinating. So I've heard about this years ago, and it just because kind of like this fabled unicorn, this federal court idea. Are people not doing it just because it's unknown, or they are not qualified?
Well, here's one answer we got from a hedge fund. They were afraid of bad publicity for pursuing the foreclosures too quickly. My response to that was, because you foreclose so slowly, you get good publicity. And the answer obviously is no. And by the way, they ended up using us. They sent a portion. It was something that hadn't occurred to in-house counsel. And I remember the discussion, like, wow, we never thought of it that way. So, but it's the percentage of files that do end up in federal court is teeny, because once you remove Fannie, Freddie, Bank of America, Citi, Chase, Wells, all the big ones, you've taken 98% of the loans out of the pool, potential pool for these foreclosures. So the other several percent that's left are what we're talking about.
Is there a difference in the auction and redemption periods and whatnot? Is that all similar process?
We don't have a redemption period in New York. That's one way of slowing down the process that hasn't happened yet in New York. But the auction process is similar. The whole process, the whole federal court foreclosure process parallels the state court process, except for the mediation. There's no mediation. If you want mediation, if you're foreclosing with the intent of getting the loan back on track or modifying it with the borrower, it's a good way of putting pressure on the borrower. Because I can tell you from personal experience, when you open up the mail and there's a summons from federal court, your day is not getting any better. It's you're off, having been sued. There was a time, by the way, for whatever it's worth, that we kept track that my partner and I had more RICO cases against us than John Gotti. That was a tool that the defendants were using at a time to try to stop the foreclosures. They would lose the foreclosure, and then they would turn around and go back into federal court, sue the bank, the title company, all the attorneys. One of them sued the judges. We had a case where the judges were sued personally, claiming that it was that we all conspired, and it was RICO, the Racketeer Influence Corrupt Organization Act. Yeah, so I had a bunch of them. But you can use the foreclosure process, especially federal court foreclosure, because it's so ominous, as a tool to negotiate with your borrower for a modification or to get back some way to get back on track. And many of our clients do that. You don't want to take anybody's house away. That's not what this is about. This is about getting there's a loan, they signed a contract to make payments. It's about getting everybody back on board again and back in compliance.
So typically when we're going to file foreclosure, I'm going to send my demand letter, and it's almost quick. It's automated, right? Get the demand letter sent out, my attorneys get files, start the process. Through federal court, this check and balance is how long should we expect a delay to review and make sure that it can be deemed appropriate for federal court?
It depends upon what you send us. When we had a review trustee and pooling agreements that were 500-600 pages, well, it's going to take longer than if you're a one-man LLC. And I've just got to do some basic checks on you individually and see where the LLC is set up. That's moments. But the trustee and pooling agreement was several hours.
Gotcha.
So it's,
So it sounds to me as that this for us as individual investors, LLCs, maybe, you know, what we're partner to, this is probably the same period of time as a normal state foreclosure process to get initiated started, send the mail letter out.
Yeah.
They get a letter from the federal system versus the state. Most of the time, the borrower doesn't do any different until they try reaching out to an attorney. And attorney says, whoa, that's a different level. I can or can't do it, or I'd rather not. It probably scares a lot of borrower attorneys, defense attorneys, to walk away from it, would it not?
it does, well, we don't know we obviously would never know who said no to taking on the case. We only know who says yes to taking on the case. But I can tell you that a lot of the attorneys with the billboards don't appear in federal court because they make their money. In order to pay for these billboards on the throughways, you have to have a lot of files coming in. This isn't a personal injury case that you settle for $10 million. These are people who are paying you hundreds of dollars or several $1,000s. So you need a lot of them, and you can't do volume in federal court for the same reason that I said the attorney who signs the complaint is the attorney who's on the file. So in a state court, you can have anybody appear on behalf of the firm.
What happens if I own a note, I start federal court, and I sell to Nathan? Does he have to use the same attorney?
No, you can switch. The attorney is always your choice. You can always switch attorneys if you want, in or out. And that's the nature of this business. We get files pulled from other law firms to come here, and we get files pulled from us to go to other law firms as servicing or ownership gets transferred. It's the nature of the beast.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I think for me is, you know, we avoid New York for multiple reasons. One of them is the foreclosure process, right? But this gives a loophole way to talk about things and open up that angle of let's explore it. Let's see if those loans are worth it and see if we can negotiate because the time frame changes. Making sure the numbers are there, make sure, you know, obviously we know our 23andMe situation and be good with that. So is it, you know, when these things take place, the clients you work with, is there anything that they need to do differently? The servers need to do anything differently? Is pretty much everything to start the process and manage the process the similar as in state court?
No, it's not. The steps are different. So it depending upon, not all servicers are equipped to handle federal court cases. And I can tell you when we board a portfolio for our clients with a servicer who doesn't have a federal process in place, it's a lot more work for us because, for example, there's no mediation. Let's start with that, and the timeframes are different, and the billing is different. The billing steps are different.
Okay.
So if anybody wants to use us and hasn't yet picked a servicer to handle the servicing process of it, we could let you know who we're working with, who is equipped for federal court and who's not. Not all of them are.
Okay.
So I have a list here actually that I'm looking at on my other screen where there are about a dozen or so New York loans, which I immediately just put at the bottom of the pile. I'm not interested. However, this is an interesting twist. So like in the comment section on the tape, it says that a complaint has been filed. So I'm assuming that's going to be state court. So then if I was interested in pursuing that, would I just have them cancel that foreclosure and then I can restart it with federal?
We'd have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. So if you
Okay.
wanted to talk with us about those specific files, just give a ring after the video is over. We'll be happy to chat with you. There are things that we could advise you to do based upon what the status of the case is and where it is, and it may not even be worthwhile. So if it's not worthwhile, then I don't want to take a case.
Yeah.
Just for the sake of taking a case. It's not going to help anybody.
Lance, is there a way for us as investors to know which servicers are federally qualified? Is there some way to find it out?
Yeah, but I wouldn't take it as my responsibility to advertise for any of the servicers. So this is something I'd be happy to discuss offline with anybody who's interested,
Yeah. Because we use all different services for all different reasons, right? If I need a workout at REO, I'm going one. If I want automation, simple, easy. If I want something where I can work the file myself, I go to one servicer. So we all pick our server based on that. This would be an angle where if this thing looks like it's going foreclosure, I'm going to switch to that servicer so I can utilize the foreclosure federal process.
A lot of our clients do that, where they have a hands-off servicer and they manage the process in-house. And you just have the servicer for compliance reasons, and that's okay. And you can generally expect you're never going to have the volume in federal court that you will in state court. So it's good to have, I think somebody who went skiing or snowboarding, somebody.
I did this morning. Yeah.
All right, so you're going to have different equipment. You're going to wear different clothing for snowboarding than you will for skiing.
Yeah.
And the equipment is very different, and you have one for one purpose and one set of equipment for the other purpose.
Mhm.
And the same thing applies to foreclosures. Not every servicer is good for everything. Not every lawyer is good for everything. Not every accountant is good for everything. So if you have an arsenal, you use the best for the job at hand.
And your firm, you just cover New York?
That's enough, I think. As I said again, I started off with a full head of hair. Look at this. Clumps. It falls out in clumps.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
yes, we're just New York. That's
Very
enough.
interesting.
So
Do
I
you
hope we
build
can
other attorneys without naming names on the video that do what you do outside New York, say in, the most common states are like, Ohio's a long time period, but Florida is depending on the loan situation. Do you have contacts that we can reach out to share and say, listen, this is the person ideally that work in those states?
we can get you that information by asking
Awesome.
our clients who have files in those states who handle federal court, because yeah, absolutely. And there are some very good attorneys in the area. And again, it's the bigger firms are good for the very, very large volume of files. You buy a pool of 500 Fannie Mae files, you're going to need a firm that can handle that volume. But you buy 2-3 files for federal court, you're going to need a sharper knife.
Very interesting.
For lack of a better analogy, metaphor.
So in this case, the unicorn is real. That's really interesting.
The unicorn is real. The unicorn is real, and you're welcome to come and pet the unicorn. He's friendly. And it's again, it's not for every file, it's not for every investor.
Right.
But when it works, it's absolutely incredible. One of our potential clients on it, we were interviewing to take over a portfolio, and they asked us for timeframes, and I had no idea that the timeframes were that quick. I thought everything was around I was just typically quoting 12 to 18 months.
Yeah.
And we ran through the system, and we had a stack of files that were 6 months or less, even just by a few days, but less than 180 days, which is unfathomable in New York, because you're not even getting into the mediation process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By then, you're not even in court. You're not even in the court's parking lot by the time that takes place.
Yeah. Wow, that's fascinating. So then, what do you see coming down? You mentioned it a little bit before, but maybe just expound on a little bit. Are you seeing, are you foreseeing an increased amount of delinquencies coming up, coming out of COVID and everything else?
Let's take a look. Hold on 1 second. I'm looking at my bad news. Oh, the market's up almost 800 points. I wonder how that happened. Well, it's the rates. The Fed has made it clear that the rates are going up. I don't know if anybody still has adjustable rate loans, but that's certainly going to impact. I don't think anybody in the industry has a clear handle on the number of delinquencies. Some people have estimates, but we haven't seen the flood, the floodgates opening up here in New York. Just as an aside, there was a problem in New York. The notices that we send out to start the foreclosure are 90-day notices, and a local state court judge had ruled that the 90-day notice, it's a complicated decision, but essentially there can't be anything else in the envelope with that 90-day notice. Mm-hmm. So the servicers and the lenders had to go and restart the processes all over again. So the moratorium ended January 15th, but it didn't.
Yeah.
So the moratorium ended probably until May or June, because an untold number of defaults had to be redeclared. So
Are you guys seeing an
Interesting.
influx yet? Are you seeing the numbers change?
no, because of this 90-day notice problem. So we've gotten some in, but some of the lenders and services are holding back on referrals until after the defaults are redeclared again with the new letters. That swamped them. They pulled, I think they were having they were having the house cleaning crews coming in to get this stuff done. It was an all hands on deck situation for most
Yeah.
companies, and it distracted them from doing the other work that was necessary. And it's just starting now. But again, we don't handle the big. We're not Fannie or Freddie attorneys, and our clients tend to be a little bit smaller and much more nimble.
Yeah.
So it's-
Awesome. Well, Lance, I think the knowledge
fascinating.
is awesome. It's one of those things that we hear about at conferences, hush hush talk, conversation, and most people probably knock it off as something that just doesn't work, right? Maybe they had one file, it didn't work for them, so the unicorn is not real, right? And what you come to find out is that it is real for certain particular cases, and knowing those particulars are important. But you can save time, you can save money. In the long run, that's what we're looking for. Good returns, return that capital fast as possible, and the bonus is by following federal court, you're probably gonna get a mod faster because most borrowers can't get the attorney in place to do the federal. And that's another win-win situation for all of us. Keep them in the house as long as possible, get them paying, everyone's happy. So Lance, I think that the information is valuable. I appreciate you sharing with us. I think this is awesome stuff that people should listen to over and over again and be thinking about not putting, like me and Nathan have done, the New York assets at the bottom of the list, because we don't want to deal with year and a half, 2 years of foreclosure, where we both could be in a spot where we can easily file these situations where I'm in Jersey, he's in Canada, we have nobody in New York. It would work out really, really well for us. So
Yeah.
I appreciate you and your team for jumping on a Friday afternoon and spending a little time with us.
A pleasure. Thank you so much, guys, and everybody else for tuning in, and I hope this was helpful for everyone. If there are
Yeah.
any questions, you can email me directly. Is my email address on there?
No, you can definitely speak it. We'll share it to whoever needs it to.
Fantastic. The email address is simple. It's Lance, LANCE, @NY, like New York, F as in Frank, C as in cat, law, LAW.com. Lance at NYFClaw.com. Clever, huh?
Clever. Very nice.
It works. Lance, again, I appreciate
Gentlemen, thank
you for joining in and sharing some time with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. Thank you.
Take care, guys.